Hey, Strong Girls. I'm Molly Herford, sports journalist, ultra runner, cyclist, and author, and founder of Strong Girl Publishing.
And I'm Dr. Sasha, executive director of Yellow Running Shoes, a researcher, engineer, elite runner, and your BFF who's breaking down the science of smashing barriers in women's sports.
Think of us as the intersection of science and culture for women and girls in sport. Each week, we'll dissect the latest headlines and cutting-edge research on female athletes.
Debunk myths about girls in sport. Talk about how hormones affect performance at every age, to the latest research in sports science around mental performance, nutrition, equipment, and so much more.
And we'll spotlight badass girls and women who are rewriting the rules of the game, sometimes literally.
Expect it to be nerdy.
And occasionally TMI.
But it will always be honest.
Whether you're a strong girl yourself or you're raising one, this show is for you. Welcome to Strong Girl Talk,
where sports science meets sisterhood.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Strong Girl Talk, the podcast where we're talking about all things women and girls in sport, whether it's culture, science, a mix thereof. And today, this is probably the last part that I'm kind of leading here, because I am turning over control to my co-host, Dr. Sasha Golish, since today we are doing a book club episode on my book, Running as Fast as We Can.
Are you gonna be okay? Are you ready to be in the hot seat?
I'm a little freaked out. I mean, honestly, it's funny. I have done enough interviews at this point that I'm reasonably ready. But this book, I've told you, before we started recording, I've told you a bunch of times now, this book was easily the hardest book that I've written, and 100% the scariest one to hit, publish now on. Not like it's really that easy. There's not one big red button where it's publish and now it's out.
There's no easy button. There's no.
Yeah. In a perfect world. I mean, I absolutely stand by it. It's also one of my favorite books that I've written, but it was the hardest for sure.
All right. Well, before we get to that, just to ease you into this, what are you currently reading?
I'm actually reading The Shutout by Gabrielle Horn, who is the former editor-in-chief of Nylon magazine, which is a fashion and music magazine that I actually wrote for back in the day when she was still editor-in-chief. She is a fantastic writer. This is this dystopian climate novel, basically. And as I'm in the van and we're traveling around, it's about a young woman traveling solo in a van. I'm not traveling solo in the van, but it feels very relevant as the story is unfolding. So yeah, fabulous. I don't really get to read a ton of fiction because I'm usually trying to do way too many things, but this is a wonderful distraction from everything else.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I love dystopian novels, so I totally have to read this. I'm going to share that I'm reading one of the Discovery of Witches books. I'm obsessed with witches. So, right?
Just conceptually, I mean, we're of the age where that actually tracks, because the 90s, the 90s and the early aughts, The Craft, Charmed, our I'm gonna say preteen to late teen years were so witchy.
Not to be confused with another word that sounds like that. I also was thinking one day I would write a book about being a witch and be you would have killed me, right? You'd be dead too. Just so we're clear, Molly, you'd be dead too back in witch days.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah. Now here's the question. You're into the witch book. Did you ever have a Wiccan book of spells or anything as a younger Sasha?
Well, I mean, sort of had a nothing book that had all sorts of random things in it. So I guess it'd be a modern witch book. I'm a modern day witch,
A modern witch, yeah. I like it.
I'm also reading Mel Robbins' Let Them, which has been interesting. I love to start my day with nonfiction. Are you reading any nonfiction right now?
I just finished Steve Magnus's Winning the Inside Game, which
same.
Pretty solid. Yeah. Yes, and we had him on my other podcast, The Consummate Athlete. Great discussion. My one sticking point with him that I've now said way too many times is that he writes about, so everyone does this, wrote about Chumbawamba being a one-hit wonder band. They were not. They were a fabulous anarcho-punk band that happened to have a hit that made it big. But other than that, they went right back to their anarcho-punk roots. After that, they did not try to capitalize on that. I get very annoyed when anyone calls them one-hit wonders.
Okay. Yeah. We really are just connected spirits. Um, yeah, we'll talk about Steve's book on another day. I would say in his book, one of the things I find challenging, and I think this is relevant to what we'll lead in with your book, is that idea of like leaving your phone at home. I love Steve and the work he does, but I wish there was some like acknowledgement of like the women's perspective of like, I get that like you want to do this, but maybe you don't feel safe. I'm not asking you to just I just want to be acknowledged.
I could not agree more. Like
And
it's
I
often an unacknowledged privilege to be able to leave your phone at home and just go off and not be stressed about that.
All right, well, we've gushed over enough authors. I'm gushing over you. Molly, I loved your book.
Oh,
And
thank you.
it was like, I was like, oh, I got to know Molly a little bit better, but she doesn't know that because I'm reading her book and she's not with me reading her book. The character development, I'm probably biased because I love cross country, but I saw cross country and I saw school sports from a lens that like wasn't my view, which was so helpful in seeing others. And your writing, I mean, I get that like hit publish wasn't super easy, but I mean, you made the book in a way you made it seem easy, but anything that's easy is so hard. So thanks for doing it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That's like the best thing that an author can hear, obviously. Um, yeah. So I guess for anyone that hasn't read it, Running as Fast as We Can is basically it's my first young adult novel. So it's very much like for high school age and up, I would say. Like I'd say very mature preteens could read it, but it definitely gets into some topics that might be a little too heavy for a younger audience. But it follows two girls who, very, very different identities, but really at the crux of it are actually way more similar than they think. Krista and Elle, as they navigate high school cross country, the sport that they did not want to do, but have to from a college application standpoint. And yeah, it sort of just follows their school year and the ups and downs, trials and tribulations. And yeah, I don't want to, I'm like about to give away the ending. I will stop there.
No giving away the ending. Before I ask, like okay, I'm just giving the audience. Molly was like, you have to ask me this question, and so before I ask you the question, did you have to run cross country to apply to college?
I did not, but there were a couple of colleges that I did not get into. And I sincerely think it was because my resume was very one-sided. I was, you know, literally like president of the lit club, president of like the poetry slam, editor in chief of the paper, like pretty much anything in the English side of things, I was in. Um, but I did really not a lot kind of outside of that because that was my life. And
When would you have done that?
honestly, and I worked like and I had my life as a little punk kid and was doing my own writing and all of that. And I mean, in a lot of ways, like, no, I didn't get into a couple of the colleges. I got into the schools that I really wanted to. I ended up getting an internship at Elle Girl magazine while I was still in high school because of that. Like, so I am not really that sad about it. But I do recognize, now that obviously there are so many reasons that girls should try sports. And honestly, I wish I had made some time for cross country because I think like out of all of the sports, cross country, and I say it in the intro of the book as a friend telling Krista about it. Cross country is the one that requires the least amount of effort if you don't want to put in the effort. Um, but I think as Krista and Elle kind of find, you do end up kind of developing a love for it after you kind of start doing it, but it just takes some time. Like running sucks when you first get started. There's no sugarcoating that, especially if you're not coming at it from like, an 8-year-old who's running for the first time. If you're coming at it from a teenager who's running for the first time, yeah, it's unpleasant. It sucks. And I think too often we kind of sugarcoat that as people who've been in sport for a long time and now love it. Uh, we forget what it's like to be the slow kid on the team or the kid who gets the cramp in the first, kilometer of running or, the kid that just feels like, oh God, I'm looking around and I do not belong here.
So many things there that you said are so important. One, right, like running when you first get into running, and actually, because I'm about to go through this and I'm going to need the advice. coming back to running is really hard. It's going to be way easier for me, right? There's a pattern of movement that's in my body. I also know how uncomfortable it is, but we don't talk about that. And then that belonging piece, and back in episode 2 with Misha, right? Like she talks about belongingness and how important it is. And it's this like tension between like you have to lean in to find belonging and people have to offer belonging. And you just did a great way of like summarizing like why sometimes it happens and why it doesn't. So I'm gonna give it to you. I know. So book's called Running as Fast as We Can. Tell us how you came up with the title.
Okay, technically speaking, if you are of a certain age, you might recognize or relate it to the Tiffany song that has the line "Running just as fast as we can," which I admit was sort of stuck in my head. I initially had wanted to call it "The Long Run" or "For the Long Run," but to be honest, that title is taken. So I was trying to kind of think through it. Because a big part of the book is about female friendship, and Elle and Krista being kind of butting heads the entire book, but there's this undercurrent of like they used to be friends, and even when they're the most at each other's throats, there's still this like line that kind of tethers them together as these like childhood friends. And I don't think like I think all of us probably have like that one friend from elementary school, from kindergarten, that even if you have nothing in common with them anymore, like there's still kind of this invisible line that connects you, like a
Yeah.
little bit, even if you haven't talked to them in decades. You still are like, oh yeah, I remember their favorite snack was this like pudding pop flavor, and this that. You remember all those like little details. So that was the long run, kind of with that. But then as I kind of reflected on it, actually running as fast as we can worked better for the title, because when I talk to high school girls now and I hear about everything that they're doing, even just looking at what I just listed there, right? Like I was going to school, I was newspaper editor, I was this, I was this, I was working, I was doing homework, I was getting good grades, I was, and then you add in school sports now, like kids have so much going on. And that's before you even add in actual social life in real life, and then what they feel like they need to do on social media to be kind of part of this valid group and do this and this. And there's just I think of high school kids now and I'm like, oh my gosh, they are just on treadmills all the time, like. And I think for a lot of them there is this sense of just never being able to catch up or get on top of things. The treadmill just keeps going. And I mean, I recognize that that's unfortunately the rest of our lives. We really don't want the treadmill to stop if we're being, honest about it. That would be a very bad thing. Um, but it definitely feels like in high school, that treadmill is really turned way up to paces that are kind of unsustainable. Which explains why kids need to sleep in on weekends, and why a lot of kids need that summer break, and it makes a lot of sense. And I don't think we give teens as much credit as they deserve for how freaking hard their lives are.
That's so many things there. So just coming back to running as fast as we can, for me, right? Like one of the things, okay, we're gonna have like Sasha events about English class.
Love it.
One of the things that used to make me cuckoo bananas in English class was I would see myself in a book and I was told, well, you can't do that. It's about what I'm telling you, what you're supposed to see. And I was like, well, thanks for ruining reading for me. But running as fast as we can, what I love about it is it wasn't about how fast Krista or Elle were. It was about how fast they were in that moment. And that's such a special thing. And again, I think it's not something that we celebrate enough, particularly in running, right? We're always talking about like, oh, well, who was on the podium, as opposed to like, hey, did you get something out of it today? Maybe it was running as fast as you can. Maybe it was being part of a team. And there were so many elements to the title that resonated with me. And cross country, and you talk about this in your book, is a really special sport because it's individual, but it's team, right? And one of the things that's a big theme in the book that comes out is this idea of like female friendships and the tensions of them. And so you do a great job at letting us like relive and refeel those stories that we had in high school. So like talk us through some of those dynamics that you wrestled with in the book.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I to kind of add to what you just said, there's a reason that there's no paces, there's no, and we'll talk about this, like there's no weights in the book, there's no paces. And I think often when you have books like, I love Bridget Jones' Diary. Like, do not get me wrong when I say this, but I think that book did a major disservice to women everywhere and continues to, because it put weights in there. So the whole, Bridget Jones thing is like, oh, every woman wants to lose 10 pounds. Every woman thinks she is overweight. Um, and it's supposed to be kind of commentary on like how this is stupid and wrong and we shouldn't be doing this. But unfortunately, when you say current weight 123, like wish I weighed less, you are setting that as the average weight, or like the weight that is deemed to be too heavy by, you know by the character, but really it's by the author, right? And I remember reading books that were similar to that back when I was younger. There's this, again, great book called Fat Chance that is about bulimia. It's about eating disorders. Again, in it, the girl weighs 126 pounds and is a size 19-20. So those two things, like A, just don't actually correlate. So it's very frustrating. And B, again, I read that when I was 12 or 13. And unfortunately, what it reads as is kind of a manual for an eating disorder, even though it's, really trying to raise awareness about eating disorders and help girls with them. I think whenever you put, weights, paces, anything like that into these books, you really run a risk that you are really setting a precedent. So it was like very particular in there that I didn't include, like, oh, I ran an 8-minute mile or something, or I weighed this much on the scale. Did not want that. Okay.
You make me giggle. And I hope everybody else is giggling. Okay, as you were saying.
As you were saying. Okay, getting back to your actual question about the dynamics of female friendships. I again struggled writing this book because female friendships at that age were something that I definitely let fall by the wayside in high school, in favor of whether it was boys or whether it was, all of the other things going on in the aforementioned treadmill of life. I let some of those, elementary school friendships lapse, particularly with, my one very close friend. So, as I was kind of writing about the dynamics, what I really wanted to get at is in high school, we're all kind of finding our new identities as the young adult version of ourselves. We're no longer kids. We're allowed to pick out our own clothes for the most part. We're starting to really develop, what kind of music we like, what kind of movies we like, what kind of uh, boys, girls, non-binary, whatever we like. We're really, coming into our own as little humans. I don't want to say young adults. I want to say like little adults. Like we're really kind of becoming like the first iterations of our adult selves. Um, and often that kind of involves shedding a bit of the baggage that we come in with, whether it's getting rid of the stuffed animal collection or, your friend that's going, I know I didn't get rid of mine either, but, your friend that's going in a different direction than you, you kind of suddenly just sort of stop hanging out with them as much. Maybe you even, you know, stage a bit of a fight to kind of make it easier on yourself to have that friendship go, kind of break up, go your separate ways. Um, a lot more, I'd say a lot of friendships just kind of fade away, but I think there's a lot at that age that have that one minor thing that blows it up just because you just don't really feel like that friend really sits with your current identity, and it's easier to blow it up than it is to acknowledge differences and figure out how you're going to kind of work into a new type of friendship around them. Um, and sports and anything competitive makes that even harder, right? Like when you're playing a sport, whether it's cross country or soccer or any of that, like, I do a lot of writing with coaches for youth sport organizations. And one of the things that always comes up is this, like, oh, we need to like mediate conflicts with the athletes and like help them see that like we need an abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset. But it's very easy to see where a scarcity mindset comes in with especially teenagers whose brains are, still being formed. And if someone makes captain of the team, that means you do not make captain of that team. It's, it's easy from a coach's perspective, or, a esteemed professor, or, philosopher or psychologist perspective, to say that, like, oh, we don't need to have this scarcity mindset. But I also understand where that scarcity mindset comes from, because guess what? There is a team leader. There is the starting lineup. There's someone faster than you. And in some ways, when it's your friend, it's even more of a tricky dynamic. The same applies to when your friend gets the scholarship, gets the guy, gets the, kudos in the school newspaper for her, lead role in the play, like any of these things. And I think we don't talk about that enough. We know that as women, we should celebrate each other and we should celebrate other women, but no one teaches us how to do that. It's just kind of this assumed thing that you just say that and we automatically can do it. And I think that's crap.
Again, why I love you. I mean, my research brain goes to Brené Brown's work, right, around high school students, right? You're actually fitting in at first, right? You're trying on all these identities to figure out who you are, which is, to your point, I don't think we talk about that enough and celebrate that enough about how important that is. And you really weave the characters through trying on some different things and going back to who maybe they were, but also seeing who they are future forward. The scarcity mindset. Oh my gosh. I think so often we forget, right? Like you and I both don't have kids, but we do a lot of work with kids, right? And a lot of the time I say to parents, like when something challenging happens, they're like, I'm going to go tell them it's going to be okay. I'm like, no, you're not. Actually, that's about the worst thing that you could do for your child right now. Let them sit in the suck, right? Like part of developing this mindset to not be in a scarcity mindset is like sitting in the discomfort. And sport is one of those like best lessons to be able to learn from discomfort and emotional regulation and creating self affirmations. We will have many episodes on all of these different things that we're talking about. But I think to your point right now, like actually, as parents and as coaches, it's almost like, and I'm sure our parents felt the same way. It's like, can't you just have these skills? And it's like, no, I felt really fortunate that my parents like really helped me create the skills. For sure, they had moments where they were frustrated with me. They're human, but actually helping people and those simple words of like this is really hard right now instead of it's going to be okay kind of switches to it actually helps with the abundance mindset long term. I'm going to switch themes a little.
Do it.
Sport has dark side and you do a really great job in the book addressing topics around disordered eating and around sexual harassment in youth sport. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to discuss sexual harassment. And, we also talk about gender-based violence. I added in the notes talking about Rebecca Cheptegei, right? It's going to be 8 months, maybe 9 months. She was set on fire by her former partner. And people say, like she succumbed to her injuries. These actions killed her, right? And we don't talk about it directly enough. And I think it takes the power away from women and what we're trying to do. So I want you to take us through why this was so important to you to include this in your book.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, huge topic. Um, I'm glad you brought up the like succumb to her injuries, like, and I'm putting air quotes around that because we see that very often in cycling. I think when you're talking about someone who got hit by a driver, you often hear hit by a car at like best case, hit by a car, which takes away the onus on the driver. Um, that's like saying set on fire, but not mentioning the person who did it. Um,
Yeah.
and then often you hear cyclists were killed in a car accident. Like, again, no, a driver hit them and killed them. So, yes, I think it's very important the language that we use when we are speaking about these situations. So, yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, why I included it. So, I think what I liked writing about is that both of the characters experience different versions of sexual harassment in the book. One is a much more kind of like obvious, like, okay, yes, this is the line, he crossed it. The other one is a little less cut and dry. Like, it's a little bit more kind of, do we count this as sexual harassment or not? And I'm putting air quotes around as I say that. We do count it. We definitely count it. Um, but I think a lot of the time, the even the more serious version that I have in the book, like I think even that gets kind of like boys will be boys pushed to the wayside, which does in fact kind of start to happen in the book, to not to give away too much. I think the tendency is to want to protect boys from the consequences of their actions with a bit of a like, oh, well, he didn't know that, or he misread it, or like didn't quite know that that was wrong. And I think girls have tremendous pressure on them to stay silent about these things, to allow these things to happen, to not speak up when they do. And I think this has been happening for decades. You know, these are situations that, you know, happen to me, happen to my friends. As women have read this, it's so like funny slash horrifying to me that pretty much every woman I've talked to has said something along the lines of either like, yes, this like similar happened to me, or like worse happened to me, or oh, nothing that, and I'm again air quotes, nothing that serious happened to me. And then there's a pause, and then there's a, well, there was that time. And then we realize, like, oh, yes, like no matter how, you know, quote unquote minor we think of it, almost all of us have experienced some kind of gender-based violence. Um, Whether it's, you know, emotional pressure, or, you know, straight up bullying or actual assault, like a lot of us have had these experiences. And you know, it does color how we go about the world, as you were mentioning with you know, reading Steve Magnus's, you know, great book. But it talks about, oh, you know, get out there without your phone, have those like moments where you're completely offline. I'll tell you right now, you know, we're traveling around and I'm running in unfamiliar areas, and I spend a lot of my run time very, very nervous. And, you know, a lot like men will not really understand the fear that you experience when you're running down a road and there's no houses on either side, and you see in the distance that there's a single man heading in your direction. And your brain defaults to like, which way am I going to run? Can I get my phone out fast enough? Like, you know, can I hit the emergency contact button? Like, what am I going to do in this situation? And I think what's like terrifying is in a lot of states in the US, and I don't think you can, like, and not everywhere in Canada, but like a lot of states in the US, you can walk into a Target or a Walmart. You can go to the sporting goods aisle. You can go to like the cute little like lady friendly setup with like, you know, the pink weights and like the bangles and the yoga mats and whatever. And you know what you can get? You can get an adorable, kid you not, hot pink little pepper spray that's made for easy access. Comes with a little sleeve that you can hold in your hand when you run. The fact that we have to have that in our sporting good departments, I think really says it all. And the fact that it's hot pink is just hilarious and just so messed up in so many ways. But seeing that, I realized like, oh yeah, this is not just me worrying about this.
It's, I mean, do you have the ring, right? There was a ring that was designed to be like keys, right? So that if you had to throw a punch, you could throw a punch, right? Like these are not the things that, 50% of the world it has to think about, right?
Yeah, and I mean, can we also talk about the fact that car keys these days would not be as effective? Very annoying. Yeah, when we were younger and car keys were smaller and metal, it was much easier to run with them kind of stuck between your hand or between your knuckles.
Well, and
But
then if you had a house key, then you had two, right? Like it was like way more.
well, they were like Edward Scissorhands at some point. It's gonna be more ineffective. Um, but yes, so it was really important to me to include those and have that be a kind of like a pretty big like you know, major plot point, and really part of the two characters really kind of finding more common ground again, which again is really kind of like a sad state of affairs when like that's what's going to bring two young women back together. But again, like that's reality, I think. And to quickly just touch on the disordered eating side of things, I did want to include that because, while I think sport can do so many amazing, incredible things, I think very often those of us in the yay girls in sport space, and like I am literally the biggest proponent of this, as I know you are too. Um, I think we tend to gloss over a little bit um, some of the feelings that sport can bring up. We know that sport can promote really healthy body image, and it can promote self-confidence. It can like promote body confidence and actual like healthier living and healthier outcomes. But it can also, especially if you're coming to sport as someone who has a body that has not necessarily been, front and center at that particular sport. If you don't have quotes around here, a runner's body, a cyclist build, a swimmer's build, a dancer's build. If you don't have that and you're entering the sport, you are probably going to feel some kind of way about it. And I don't think we do a good enough job of protecting young women from that feeling and from the poor decision making that can completely understandably end up happening as a result. And I would say the really great high school coaches that I've met, they do their best. Like, this is not a knock on high school coaches. They're working full-time jobs as teachers. They're very, very busy. They have very little training when it comes to sport nutrition and understanding of young women's psychology as it pertains to disordered eating disorders, all of that stuff. So this is, no shade on them, but the number of coaches that I've heard talking to athletes and are like, oh, like no Halloween candy till after nationals. You know, oh, don't eat that. Like, that's bad. That's, this, that, and the other thing. And then I'd see what some girls in some of the coaching that I've done, what some girls were eating before, during, and after meets and competitions and races. It was really eye-opening because I realized, like, oh, they're just not getting the education that they need, and they're doing what they think is like going to get them to quote the build that they want. For me, like, the best thing that's ever happened to me in like any of my coaching or career really was like, you know I'm a pretty muscular individual, we'll say. And I was coaching a camp for like 3 weeks in Spain, and I was for cyclists, and they were all teens, and I was doing a yoga session with them, whatever, and we were walking back to the house, and the one girl said to me, she's like, I see how much you're eating every day, and it's making me realize, like, I want to look like you, and I'm not eating enough. And it was the best thing I've ever heard. And like, I consider it part of my job to eat a lot and make sure that that is very apparent that I'm eating a lot, especially when I'm on those camps. So yeah, to, get to kind of have a platform for that where it's, hopefully mixed into some, fun writing and fun fiction and, a compelling storyline, but also we're kind of getting across the point that, like, these are feelings that are very common, and these are feelings that we can work with and identify, and ultimately find a healthier way to have this relationship with food and with our body. So yeah, hopefully it gets woven in there in a way that is not too preachy.
No, not at all. I feel like there's a t-shirt or something in there that's like, my job is to show you how to eat a lot. I'm happy to wear that. I too eat a lot. Um, I just want to go back to something you said, right? So in the research, a lot of the research I look at in body image with Kathy, who I've mentioned in a couple episodes already, talks about sort of undoing this sporting bodies, right? That we have this like narrow view of like, my time to turn to air quotes, a runner's body, a cyclist's body. I went to the ballet last week. One of my favorite things to do is take myself to the ballet. I got to sit front row center again. And it was really awesome to see a whole bunch of different bodies. And I was like overwhelmed by this one woman's arms. I was like, I really just would like to go up to you after and understand how you make them look so good. But if you think about a traditional ballerina's body, someone would have said she's not a ballerina. And she was outstanding. And so I think it's actually, my next question for you is around coaches and parents and guardians and different approaches we can take. But, as a researcher, one of the things, I would like to see people do is to move away from supporting those traditional bodies. Lauren Fleshman's book does such a good job in running, being like, it's based on a white male body from the ages of 18 to 23, right? I mean, that's just not the norm for the majority of people out there running. So, can you share with us some more on what parents, coaches, and guardians can do to approach some of these issues?
Definitely. I mean, I think the first thing is really to echo what you just said is stop talking about the body in a way that is like, this is the way it should be. This is how it shouldn't be. Really, any commentary on the body. Let's just maybe stop that. Even if you think it's positive, it's not. As whether you're a coach, whether you're a parent. I remember back when I was in cycling as a younger, early 20s, still really figuring this out. I've had a lot of my own like bad advice and stuff over the years. And I remember once someone telling me after I, had an off season that I looked healthy. And I would see you're doing the eyebrow because you know exactly how healthy translates when you're an endurance athlete. You're like, you think I'm fat, don't you?
Yep.
So yeah, let's maybe just not. Let's just get away from any of that. I think in the similar vein of let's just not, I think it's if you don't know something, do not pretend that you do. Coaches, there are so many books, references, articles written by sports dietitians that you can point your athletes to. You could ask a sports dietitian in your area to come in and talk to your athletes. Honestly, they probably will. A lot of them are more than happy to spend, half an hour, whether it's on Zoom or in real life, talking to your athletes. Same thing with parents. I would actually suggest like parents, if you can afford it, I would actually go, make an appointment with a registered dietitian for your athlete and go with them. Sit down with them, like ask the questions, but make sure you exit like 10 minutes early. Give them a chance to actually have a conversation with the dietitian where they can ask stuff without you around. But I think for you, it's important to be there for at least part of it, just so you can kind of use that framing as you're grocery shopping. Because for young athletes, especially when we're talking high school, they largely are only eating what's in the kitchen. I don't know about you, but I was not spending any of my hard-earned money on snacks really when I was younger. I was spending it on, gas to get to concerts and clothes and that kind of stuff. Food was not really high on my list. So, it really begins and ends with what the parents have in the kitchen for the most part. And really making sure that athletes have that access. I think there's way too many young athletes that go to college, and I dealt with a lot of these teens at these camps where they don't know how to make rice, they don't know how to make eggs, they don't know how to make the basics because no one ever taught them. Like mom or dad just put their food in front of them, and that was that. So I think help your athletes learn to cook so they can kind of continue that trajectory. And of course, I'm very excited. We do have Stevie Lynn Smith, a registered dietitian, expert in sport dietetics, who is writing a book with us called Power Up, a young woman's guide to sports nutrition, I believe is the subtitle. And that'll be out in the fall. So we actually will have an entire book that digs into all of these very nuanced topics. That's an easy resource, whether you're an athlete, a parent, or a coach. So yeah, very excited about that.
That's awesome. I mean, and I secretly want to do a cookbook, but I'd never actually framed it or thought about it as like, here's how you make eggs. And I think you make a really good point that it's not just the recipes. It's like, here's how to do this, and then here's how to do this. One thing I want to add in terms of resources for parents, coaches, and guardians as it relates kind of to everything and anything you might see that kind of looks like that makes your stomach flip in sport is being an upstander. There's a lot of talk about being a bystander right now. And I think being a bystander kind of feels like if you've taken any of the training, I kind of feel like I'm going to go tattletale on somebody. But an upstander looks out for someone. And the first thing that they do when they see someone that's in trouble is they go over and be like, hey, I noticed this. Are you okay? And that connection that's so meaningful, and I think about some of the challenges when you were like, hey, wait a minute, I'm one of those. And how powerful it would have been if someone had come up to me then to say, hey, I've noticed this. Are you okay? And just the shift in that conversation. And so, like over the next year, I'm really hoping to, with Kathy, like develop some of this upstander, resources so that people can have access to this kind of stuff. But, I think when we connect with people, like the world just becomes way better place. So we're going to leave this on a positive note. And the Canadian sport policy is in its third draft, and it is supposed to come out imminently. I'm just, I'm quotations, giggling, smiling. But I mean, at the end of it, we know that sport has the power to change the world. And actually, when we really let sport can really positively change our own world. And so, what lessons do you want to share about sport through cross country from this book with the audience about like why sport? It's not just so important to you, but can be so important for others.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what drew me in was the basic physical benefits. I was a very unhealthy late teen and, really only got into it because I was like, okay, I'm feeling like crap. Stairs are getting harder. Maybe I should do some of this like exercise that I keep hearing so much about. So I came to it for the physical benefits, but I stayed for the mental ones. And I think that plays out in the book as the girls kind of figure out, yeah, running sucks. And you know what? It does get easier, but like it doesn't get so much easier that it never sucks. My sister, who's getting back into running again, messaged me the other day and it's like, when is it going to stop sucking? And I'm like, it doesn't. It just changes how it sucks. Uh, but you also get, this benefit of just such mental clarity. And that's what keeps me going in it. That's, what got me really hooked on it is, oh, I'm feeling stressed about something. Like, oh, my chest is like feeling tight. My heart's getting a little bit like, beating a little bit faster. Like, what's going to help? Getting out and moving my body, whether it's a run, a walk, a like quick little yoga sesh, like whatever it is. Movement has the power to completely shift, not just your physical body, but your mindset. And I think that's, really for the non-athletes in the crowd, the bookworms that I'm trying so hard to reach. I think that's probably like the best message is this can help you with your writing. This can help you with that history paper. This can help you, get to that breakthrough in, whatever field you're in. So yeah, that's what sport has, done for me. What about
Well,
you?
I was to say, instead of me, let me give you the research first, right? Because, okay, so young adults, and, I think everyone wants some version of success academically. We have overwhelming research that says if you're active, you're more likely to have academic success, however you define academic success. We have overwhelming research about the mental health benefits. For me, and as related to the research, it's the community piece. There's something special, and for me, doesn't suck. There is something really special about flying free on a solo run where you move at your own pace and you see the world through a different view. But there's something also like really special about a community, run, walk. I loved hard track workouts with my teammates. Like Madeline Kelly would say, we got a barn burner today, right? Like those barn burners where everybody was working super hard together and you just kind of like, you lifted each other up and you became better. There's so many overwhelming benefits to sport. So yeah. Any last words before we wrap things up?
Not that I can think of, other than if you haven't read Running as Fast as We Can, you can get it pretty much wherever books are sold. You can find us over at stronggirlpublishing.com. All the links are over there. If you have read it and you do like it and you do like the snack concept, we do have the Run All the Miles, Eat All the Snacks sweatshirt that is available. You've probably seen pictures of Sasha or me wearing it. Definitely, again, stronggirlpublishing.com to check that out. And
Okay, hang
with
on.
that,
No,
mhm.
you're not done. I got one more for you. It's a sneaker.
Oh, sneaky. So
Will
sneaky.
we get a sequel?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think if we do, it's going to be a college version. So
Okay.
it'll be kind of like you could have, they connect, but they don't necessarily have to be read back to back to make sense. It won't be, I mean, I guess similar to the Shred Girl series where the books can all stand alone. This would be more like, yeah, Krista and Elle's like first year of college kind of experience. So
I
yeah,
love it.
maybe stay tuned to that. I mean, you've also got my brain going. I think we're gonna have an audiobook version of it in the near future too. So stay tuned.
Yay. Thanks, Molly. Thanks for being so vulnerable.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for the great questions. And thanks everyone for listening. Make sure you follow along over on our Substack. Find us on the Instagram, the internet, pretty much everywhere. And we will catch you next week.